Hi, my name is Izzy. I'm working in Brighton at the moment as an F2, and in August I am going to take up a core medical training post in Cambridge. I'd known since medical school that I really wanted to do a medical specialty rather than a surgical one. I thought it would suit my personality a little bit better. I also think that most of the specialties that I've had an interest in over the past couple of years require core medical training in order to go on to study those later. But I'm not entirely decided exactly what I want to do later on. But core medical training, I think, would provide a good foundation for any of the specialties that I choose. And I really wanted another couple of years, trying a few new things out and seeing whether those specialties would suit me. Well, I think I haven't quite made a choice of exactly what I wanted to do long term yet, but I've been lucky in that a lot of the rotations I've done throughout my foundation programme are actually in specialties that I've been interested in, and I've had the opportunity to talk to registrars and SHOs who are currently doing core medical training to try and get an idea of how much they enjoy it and whether it would be suitable for me. I haven't really taken up any tasters in anything, but I know a lot of people who have, and I think those have been very valuable to them. Essentially, I looked on the internet and looked at the core medical training website and used that to help me make a decision about whether to go into it or not. I had a few discussions with my educational supervisor about sort of careers planning and what specialty I might want to go into further on, and therefore whether core medical training was the best way to go about that. So I didn't have a particularly concrete plan B. I'd pretty much set myself on core medical training. I did investigate a few other options. I was quite interested in infectious diseases, so I had a look at the diploma in tropical medicine and the potential for working abroad following that. And I also looked at potential masters in medical education. I found when I was sort of researching these options that actually a lot of the deadline dates came before I would have found out about core medical training, and therefore weren't particularly suitable options as plan B. Primarily I concentrated on my main day job, which obviously is one of the most important things when you're applying for further specialty. I then had a look on the CMT website and looked at the person specification and what they would require for the application. So having read that, I took part in a number of audits and completed an audit cycle looking at antibiotics. I was also lucky enough to be on the academic foundation programme and to get the opportunity to do some research and present some abstracts at conferences. I then also looked into doing as much teaching as I could and just teaching medical students on the wards and getting involved in some of the teaching that the medical school arranges here. And I also became one of the mess presidents in the hospital, so ended up doing a lot of kind of leadership type skill improvement and liaising with chief executives and the management in the hospital, which actually came in very handy when I ended up filling in the application form. I think the most important thing I found was it was very useful to look at it as soon as it was available, because it was a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be, although the actual system works quite well. It's got a lot of factual detail that you need to fill in, and it's certainly not something I would want to be doing the night before it needed to be submitted. I think I did it in 3 or 4 sittings in the end, starting off with all the sort of factual details, so where you've been, if you'd had any prizes and that kind of thing, and then spent the rest of the time concentrating on the free text boxes, which were a little bit more difficult to and required a bit more thought as to what you're going to put into them. The word limits are fairly constricting, so I think it's important to spend a bit of time trying to get your points across in as concise a manner as possible. I also thought it was a good idea once you've finished it to just get somebody else to read it, because by the end of it you're absolutely sick of reading your own prose, and having somebody else checking out your spelling and your grammar is always very useful. I thought there were 2 main strands really to preparation for my interview. One was making the portfolio, which was incredibly time consuming. I mean, you really do have to provide evidence for every single thing that you have said on your application form, which actually can take a fair while to collect together. And particularly if you've said something that's actually quite difficult to substantiate, you may need a letter from somebody, and obviously that takes time, especially if it's somebody back at medical school. So that was a fairly stressful time, but I'd say just leave yourself so much time to do it. Don't want to be sort of chasing around after bits of evidence just before your interview. I think the second strand to it is having a think about the kind of questions that you might well be asked. Obviously, there are sort of 3 sections to it, or 3 stations, one being your portfolio, and then a clinical and ethical scenario. So I really went through and had a look at some books that had practice interview questions, and practiced a bit with friends who were also doing similar interviews, and had to think about if they were deanery specific questions, why I wanted to go to a particular deanery, or why I wanted to do a particular specialty. Well, I wish I'd looked at the person specification a bit earlier on in foundation training. I think as soon as you have an idea of what you want to do for your next step, then it's sort of sensible to have a look at it and try and guide what you do at work towards your application. I also wish that I'd collected more of the evidence for the portfolio slightly earlier on, rather than having to reach around for it so near to interview. Okay, so I think primarily it's important to choose an area that you're interested in, because that makes your application a lot easier, and when you get to interview that will show through. I think it's often very difficult to motivate yourself to do all the other things that the application requires, like the audits and the research, and I think if you choose something that you're interested in, that all becomes much easier. Secondly, I think you need to allow yourself a lot of time to do the application, especially the portfolio and the form. Don't be looking at it at the last minute. It really does take a fair amount of time up. I also spent a lot of time talking to people who were already doing the training, and got their advice on it, and also learnt about any of their interview stories, which were quite useful. I also think going along to things like the RCP Open Days and the BMJ Careers Fairs can be very useful as well.